I suppose it all began with the silence. Not the comfortable silence of a library or the peaceful hush of a pre-dawn morning, but the heavy, oppressive silence of a room where a life's value has just been calculated and found wanting. The lawyer's office was decorated in the way of all places that deliver bad news, expensive, impersonal, and smelling faintly of lemon polish and quiet desperation. The mahogany desk was a vast, polished sea between myself and the man reading my parents' last will and testament. My brother Mark sat beside me, the very picture of curated grief. His suit was tailored, his sorrow was impeccable, and his hand rested on my shoulder in a gesture that was meant to look like comfort, but felt more like a brand. His name is Wren, and I'm a biochemist. It's a fact that my parents, Albert and Carol, always found inconvenient. It was a messy, complicated profession they couldn't brag about at the country club. It wasn't like Mark's job. Mark was a salesman, a purveyor of charm, a man who could sell ice in a blizzard and make you thank him for the privilege. He couldn't tell a protein from a placebo, but he had a firm handshake and a dazzling smile. And in my parents' world, that was the only kind of currency that mattered. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, whose face seemed permanently fixed in an expression of mild disappointment, cleared his throat. He'd just read the part about the family assets, the house, the stock portfolio, all of it going to Mark. I hadn't expected anything else. But then came the part about the business. Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals, my father's pride, my mother's legacy. It was their third child, the one that got all the attention, the one that was always perfect. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses. He read, his voice a dry monotone that scraped against my raw nerves. To our beloved son Mark, we bequeath the entirety of Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals, with full confidence that he will guide it to new heights of success. I felt Mark's hand squeeze my shoulder, a little punctuation mark of victory. I stared at a point on the wall just over the lawyer's head, focusing on a single meaningless swirl in the wood grain. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were floating above my own body, watching a particularly cruel piece of theater unfold. Then came the final, crushing blow. The mention of me. It was an afterthought, a loose thread they'd forgotten to snip. As for their daughter, Wren, Mr. Sterling read, and for the first time, he had the decency to look uncomfortable. We hope Mark will find a suitable role for his sister within the company. A suitable role, not a thank you. Not an acknowledgement, not even a token gesture, just a gentle suggestion that my charming, scientifically illiterate brother might, out of the goodness of his heart, find some menial task for the little sister, who'd always been a bit of a disappointment. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A suitable role, like I was a piece of old furniture, to be placed in a corner where I wouldn't be too obtrusive. Mark let out a soft, performative sigh. He leaned in, his voice a stage whisper. Don't you worry, sis. We'll take care of you. We'll always take care of you. We'll always take care of you. And that's when something inside me, a piece of glass I didn't even know was there, finally cracked, because they didn't know. My parents, in their magnificent self-absorbed bubble, had no idea. They didn't know that, for the last 3 years, I, Wren, the inconvenient biochemist, had been the one secretly, silently, relentlessly developing their new blockbuster drug. The drug that was going to save their failing company, a revolutionary Alzheimer's treatment, codenamed Athelgard. I did it in the old forgotten lab, in the basement of the headquarters, a place they hadn't set foot in for a decade. I did it while Mark was out on the golf course, building relationships. I did it while they were basking in the glow of their golden boy, and while they were busy writing my name out of their will, they'd forgotten about another document, A much more important document. 6 months ago, when the final formulation for Athelgard was perfected, they told me to handle the science stuff. That's what they always said. You handle the science stuff, Ren. So I did. I filed the international patent, and in my quiet, methodical way, I made sure my name, and my name alone, was listed as the inventor and assignee. They were so busy planning Mark's triumphant future as CEO that they never bothered to read the paperwork. They just saw the filing confirmation and assumed everything was for the good of the company. The company is worthless without the drug, and I own the drug. The lawyer closed the folder with a soft final thud. The sound echoed the closing of a door on my entire life up to that point. Mark stood up, pulling me into a one-armed hug that smelled of expensive cologne and insincerity. He was already the magnanimous king, preparing to offer a crumb from his table to his pathetic little sister. But as I stood there, wrapped in his false embrace, all I could think about was the beautiful, intricate, and utterly savage power of a single legally binding signature. Hard. They had left me with nothing but a condescending pity pat on the head. They had no idea that I was the one holding the crown. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. At that moment, it was about the stunning, ice-cold clarity of survival. I didn't say a word as we left the office. Mark was talking, of course. He was always talking. He spoke of legacy, of Dad's vision, of how we'd get through this together. His words were a smooth, meaningless river flowing around the jagged rock of my silence. I just nodded, my mind a million miles away, rereading the invisible text of that patent in my head, clause by clause, line by line. A legal fortress I had built around my life's work. A fortress they didn't even know existed. He thought he was walking into his kingdom. He was walking into a cage, and I was the one holding the key. I walked out of that building and into the gray, drizzling Portland afternoon. The cold rain on my face felt like a baptism. It was the end of Ren, the suitable sister. It was the beginning of something else entirely, something they had created, piece by painful piece, over 30 years of casual dismissal, and they were going to be so surprised to finally meet her. I drove without a destination, the city blurring past my window in a watercolor of wet asphalt and neon. The windshield wipers kept a frantic, hypnotic rhythm, like a panicked heartbeat. Mark's words echoed in my head, a nauseating loop of practiced sympathy. Don't you worry, sis. We'll take care of you. It was the same tone he'd used when I was 10, and my pet hamster died, handing me $1 to buy a new one, as if grief were a vending machine. He had no concept of things that couldn't be bought, sold, or charmed his way out of. He saw my life's work as a line item, an asset to be managed, and he saw me as a liability to be placated. I ended up in the parking lot of my apartment building, a squat, unremarkable brick structure that had always felt more like a temporary shelter than a home. I killed the engine and just sat there, the silence in the car now a hollow, roaring vacuum. The weight of the last 3 years, the last 30 years, pressed down on me, a physical force that made it hard to breathe. The long nights in the lab, fueled by stale coffee, and a desperate need to prove myself to people who weren't even watching. The quiet dismissals, the condescending praise, every single slight, every casual disregard, coalesced into a single massive point of pain behind my eyes. I finally managed to get out of the car and stumble up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. The moment I closed the door behind me, the fortress I'd built inside myself crumbled into dust. I slid down the door, my legs giving out, and I wept. It wasn't a quiet, dignified cry. It was a raw, guttural sob that tore its way out of my chest, a sound of pure, undiluted agony. It was a funeral for the little girl who had spent her entire life hoping that if she was just smart enough, just quiet enough, just useful enough, her parents would finally see her. I was mourning the death of a hope I hadn't even realized I was still clinging to. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of scientific journals and tidy, ordered chaos, suddenly felt like a cage. The framed posters of the Krebs cycle and the periodic table on my walls seemed to mock me. All that knowledge, all that work. And for what? To be offered a suitable role by my feckless brother. I pushed myself to my feet and began to pace, a caged animal in a space that was suddenly too small to contain the storm inside me. My gaze fell on a photograph on my bookshelf. It was from about 15 years ago, a family ski trip. My parents were beaming, flanking a triumphant Mark, who was holding up a small, gaudy trophy from a beginner's slalom race. I was in the photo too, off to the side, my face half obscured by my father's shoulder. I remembered that day with a stinging clarity. Earlier that morning, I had received an email notifying me that I'd won a prestigious state-level science scholarship. I'd run to tell them, my heart pounding with pride. My father had glanced up from waxing Mark's skis and said, "That's nice, honey. Don't distract your brother. He needs to focus for the big race." Later, when Mark won his plastic trophy, my mother had wept with joy and declared it was the proudest day of her life. My scholarship was never mentioned again. It was always like that, 1,000 tiny cuts that bleed you dry over a lifetime. They saw Mark's potential as a shining, limitless horizon, and mine as a quaint, dusty attic full of strange hobbies. When I announced I was pursuing a doctorate in biochemistry, my mother had sighed, a long-suffering sound she had perfected. "Oh, Ren, all that school, when are you going to find a nice man and settle down? Look at your brother. He's already a junior associate." Mark had been a junior associate at 3 different companies in 5 years, a fact she conveniently omitted. His charm got him in the door, but his incompetence usually showed him the way out a year or 2 later. But in their eyes, his failures were just learning experiences, while my successes were distractions. The memory floodgates were open, and I couldn't stop the torrent. I remembered the day, 3 years ago, when my father called me. I was a postdoc at the university, working grueling hours for a meager stipend, feeling the familiar burn of academic disillusionment. Sterling Carver was in trouble. Their pipeline of new products had run dry. Their old patents were expiring, and they were bleeding money. "Ren," my father had said, his voice stripped of its usual booming confidence, "we need your help. The company, it's not doing well. We have this lab, it's just sitting there. Maybe you could, I don't know, tinker a bit, come up with something, just for a little while, to help the family out." Help the family out. It was their favorite phrase, a silken rope they used to pull me in whenever they needed something. I was hesitant, but I was also broke and tired of the academic rat race, and a part of me, that stupid, hopeful little girl, thought this was it. This was my chance. If I could save the company, then they would have to see me. They would have to acknowledge me. So I agreed. There was no contract, no salary, just a vague promise of being taken care of, and a monthly stipend for lab expenses that barely covered the cost of reagents. I moved my life into that dusty, forgotten basement lab. It was a relic from the company's early days, with antiquated equipment and peeling linoleum floors, but it was mine. For 3 years that basement was my world. I worked 16-hour days, chasing down molecular pathways, running endless assays, and poring over data until the numbers blurred into a meaningless dance. I lived and breathed the problem of Alzheimer's, the cruel disease that had taken my maternal grandmother. I wasn't just building a product, I was fighting a ghost. I remembered the breakthrough. It was 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was running a final confirmation on a novel peptide sequence. I watched the mass spectrometer churn out its data, my heart hammering against my ribs, and there it was, a clean, undeniable signal, a perfect bond. It worked. Athelgard was real. I had done it. I sank into my worn-out office chair, tears of exhaustion and pure, unadulterated triumph streaming down my face. The next day, I practically ran to my father's office, the printed data clutched in my hand like a holy text. He and my mother were there, going over dismal financial reports with Mark. I laid the papers on the polished mahogany desk. "I did it," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. "It's a viable neuroprotective agent. It doesn't just treat symptoms. It appears to halt plaque formation in the test models. This is it. This will save the company." My father picked up the sheet, squinting at the complex charts. He had no idea what he was looking at. He handed it to Mark. "What do you think, son?" Mark glanced at it, a flicker of something. Was it jealousy in his eyes before his salesman's mask slid back into place? "Wow," he said, the word utterly devoid of genuine awe. "This looks impressive. Really impressive, sis." He then turned to my father, his eyes alight with a different kind of excitement. "Dad, the sales potential here is astronomical. We can brand this as the miracle cure. I can have a marketing plan on your desk by Monday. We'll need a new campaign, a whole new image for the company." And just like that, it was gone. My moment, my discovery. It was instantly absorbed into the machinery of Mark's ambition. My parents' faces, which had been grim moments before, were now glowing with pride. But they weren't looking at me. They were looking at Mark. "That's our boy," my mother said, reaching out to pat his arm, always seeing the big picture. They had already moved on. The miracle of the science was just raw material. The real magic, to them, was the sale. My 3 years of relentless, mind-breaking work were reduced to a single bullet point in Mark's future presentation. That was the day the hope truly began to die. It was also the day I called my old university friend, Lena Petrova, a woman with a mind as sharp as a scalpel, and a healthy, well-earned cynicism about the world. I told her about the breakthrough and my parents' reaction. She listened patiently, and when I was done, she said something that would change everything. "Ren, you need to protect yourself. These people, your family, they see you as a resource, not a person. When they tell you to file the patent, you hire your own lawyer. You make sure your name is on it, not as an employee, but as the inventor. Is there a paper trail? Are they paying you a salary?" "No," I'd said, "just an expense stipend." "Even better," Lena had said, her voice grim. "They've been stupid, Ren. Don't you be stupid too." And so, when my father had breezily told me a few months later to handle the science stuff and get the patent filed, I did exactly as Lena advised. I found the best, most ruthless patent attorney in Portland. I used my own savings to pay her. We structured it perfectly. They thought I was a quiet lab mouse. They had no idea I was building a dragon's hoard. My pacing stopped. The storm of tears had passed, leaving behind a landscape of cold, hard clarity. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Mark. I picked it up, my hand steady. "Hey sis, tough day. I know, but we'll get through it. Let's have a drink soon and figure out your new role. Maybe something in HR. You're good with details." HR, he wanted to put me in human resources, The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was almost sublime. He thought he was throwing me a bone, a suitable role where my nerdy attention to detail could be put to good use, managing paperwork and employee benefits. He was offering me a job as a glorified clerk in the company that I had single-handedly saved from extinction. I looked at the message, at the cheerful, clueless, condescending words, and I laughed. It started as a small, bitter chuckle, but it grew into a full-throated, liberating laugh. The sound bounced off the walls of my small apartment, a sound of chains breaking. That was the catalyst. That was the moment the last vestiges of grief and hurt were burned away, cauterized by the white-hot flame of pure, righteous anger. The little girl who wanted her parents' approval was gone. The woman who was about to take back her life had just arrived. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about correction. It was about rewriting the narrative they had forced upon me for 30 years. It was about making the value of my work so undeniable, so catastrophically large, that even they could not ignore it. I didn't reply to Mark's text. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and found Lena's number. She answered on the second ring. "Lena," I said, my voice calmer than it had been in years. "It happened. It's even worse than we thought." I told her about the will, about the suitable role. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Lena said, her voice a low growl, "Okay, it's time. Burn them to the ground." "I have a better idea," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "I'm not going to burn it to the ground. I'm going to own it." The coffee shop Lena chose was a classic Portland haunt, dimly lit, smelling of rain-dampened coats and dark roast coffee, with a soundtrack of indie folk music and the gentle clatter of ceramic mugs. It was the perfect place for a quiet conspiracy. Lena was already there when I arrived, tucked into a corner booth with a steaming mug cradled in her hands. Dr. Lena Petrova was a force of nature, a brilliant geneticist with fiery red hair and an even fierier contempt for mediocrity. She was the only person in my life who had never once underestimated me. She looked up as I slid into the booth, her sharp green eyes scanning my face. "You look different," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "I feel different," I admitted. "The part of my brain that used to care what they think has been surgically removed." "Good," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "It was a malignant tumor, so lay it all out for me. The will, the patent, the ridiculously insulting text message." I recounted the entire sordid affair, from Mr. Sterling's monotone reading to Mark's offer of a job in HR. Lena listened without interruption, her expression growing progressively stonier. When I finished, she stared into her mug for a long moment, as if reading the future in the coffee grounds. "They didn't just write you out of the will, Ren," she said finally, her voice low and intense. "They tried to erase you. They tried to turn you into a footnote in your own life story. The sheer narcissistic audacity of it is almost impressive." She looked me dead in the eye. "You know what this means, right? No more half measures, no more hoping they'll do the right thing. You have to treat this like a hostile takeover, because that's what it is." "That's why I called you," I said, feeling a surge of strength from her conviction. "And that's why I have a meeting with Evelyn Reed this afternoon." Lena's eyebrows shot up. Evelyn Reed, the shark in a skirt? Oh, this is getting good. Evelyn Reed was the patent attorney she had recommended, a woman with a reputation for being as brilliant as she was terrifying. "What's the plan?" "The plan is silence," I said. "For now, I'm going to let Mark play CEO. I'm going to let him march into that company, sit in Dad's big chair, and discover that the throne is made of smoke." Lena's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. "Let him schedule meetings with investors. Let him promise them the moon. Let him find out that the rocket ship belongs to you. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. And the subplot, Ren, the thing we talked about. She was referring to the masterstroke of our plan, the real plausibility layer, as she called it. On her advice, when I'd sought out Evelyn Reed, I hadn't just filed the patent in my name, we had created a legal entity, a limited liability company. It was called Helios Biochemical LLC. It was a simple, one-person consulting firm. Me, over the past 3 years, all the expense stipends my parents had given me weren't just cash deposits. I had insisted on submitting formal invoices from Helios Biochemical for consulting services and laboratory supply procurement. My parents, in their haste and financial ignorance, had signed every check. They had, in effect, been paying my company as an outside contractor. Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals had no legal standing as my employer for this project. They had no claim to my work product. They had unknowingly funded the creation of the very weapon that would be used against them. Helios Biochemical is ready to make its presence known. I confirmed. Beautiful, Lena breathed, looking genuinely delighted. It's a work of art, a masterpiece of legal jujitsu. She then sighed, a flicker of her own troubles crossing her face. I wish I could solve my problems with a well-drafted LLC. What's the latest with Henderson? I asked. Professor Henderson was her department head, a pompous academic gatekeeper who seemed to take personal offense at Lena's brilliance. The usual, she said, stirring her coffee with unnecessary vigor. He rejected my latest grant proposal, said my work on telomere shortening as a biomarker for early-stage Alzheimer's was, and I quote, a niche inquiry with limited commercial application. The man has the scientific vision of a garden snail. He'd rather fund another tedious study on something safe than take a risk on something that could actually change lives. Her struggle was a mirror of my own, just in a different arena. We were two women who were constantly told our work wasn't valuable by men who were threatened by it. He's an idiot, Lena. Your work is groundbreaking. I know, she said, a flash of her usual fire returning. But he holds the purse strings, for now. She gave me a wry smile. But enough about my small-time tyrant. We're here to plan the downfall of yours. What does Evelyn say is the next step? She wants to draft the official correspondence, I said. 2 documents. The first is a cease and desist letter, informing Sterling Carver that any attempt to produce, market, or even discuss the drug known as Athelgard is an infringement of the patent held exclusively by Helios Biochemical. The second is the offers. I explained the terms I'd worked out with Evelyn. It was designed to be a poison pill disguised as a peace treaty. Helios Biochemical would grant Sterling Carver an exclusive license to produce and sell Athelgard. In return, Sterling Carver would pay Helios Biochemical 80% of all net profits, provide quarterly audited financial statements, and grant me a non-voting seat on the board with full oversight of the Athelgard project. Lena let out a low whistle. 80%, Ren. That's not a licensing deal, that's a surrender document. Exactly, I said. It's an offer he can't accept. But it's an offer we made. It makes us look reasonable when he inevitably refuses, and we pull the plug entirely. It's about controlling the narrative. You've learned, Lena said, a real warmth in her eyes. You're not just the scientist anymore. You're the strategist. That afternoon, I met with Evelyn Reed in her corner office overlooking the Willamette River. The office was all glass, steel, and stark white orchids. Evelyn herself was cut from the same cloth. She was a woman in her 50s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a gaze that could probably etch glass. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. The documents are ready for your review, she said, sliding a thin folder across her glass desk. The cease and desist is standard but firm. The licensing proposal is as you requested, brutally specific. I read through them. The dense legal language, a kind of poetry. Every word was a stone in the wall I was building. Every clause was a lock on the cage. Evelyn explained the strategy in her crisp, precise voice. "We do not send these yet," she stated. "We wait. Your brother is a salesman. His instinct will be to sell. He will start making promises to investors, to distributors, maybe even to the press. We let him build his own gallows. The higher he builds it, the harder he will fall. He needs to be the one who reveals his own powerlessness to the world." "And what do?" I asked. "You do nothing," Evelyn said, a faint, reptilian smile on her lips. "You go home, you read a book, you take up a new hobby, you become a ghost. Your absence will be a far more powerful statement than your presence ever could be. Let the void you leave behind do the talking." The plan was set. It was a silent, patient war. Mark was about to charge onto a battlefield where all the mines were already laid, and he didn't even know he was at war. He thought he was taking a victory lap. I felt a tremor of something that might have been fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, thrilling resolve. They had mistaken my silence for weakness for 30 years. They were about to learn that silence can also be the sound of a blade being sharpened. Before I left, Evelyn gave me one last piece of advice. "One more thing, Wren," she said, her eyes pinning me in place. "Go to the lab tonight. Take everything, your notebooks, your data, your prototypes. Erase the hard drives. Leave them with nothing but empty benches and a bad smell. When they finally look for the goose that lays the golden eggs, they need to find that the goose has flown and taken the eggs with her." The lab was my real home. Going there that night felt like a final, solemn farewell. I used my old key, the one they never bothered to ask for back, and let myself into the silent, cavernous headquarters of Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals. The main floors were dark, a ghost ship adrift in the sea of my family's ambition. I took the service elevator down to the basement, the familiar metallic groan, a lonely sound in the stillness. The lab door hissed open, and the air hit me, that unique smell of sterile ethanol, nutrient agar, and my own tireless effort. For a moment, a wave of sadness washed over me. This place, this forgotten dungeon, was where I had created something miraculous. It was a part of me, but it was also the scene of the crime. I didn't waste time on sentiment. I worked with a cold, methodical efficiency that would have made Evelyn Reed proud. I started with the physical notebooks, dozens of them, filled with my cramped handwriting, detailing every failed experiment, every tiny breakthrough, every single step on the long road to Ethelgard. They went into a series of sturdy cardboard boxes. Next, the computer systems. I had my own firewalled server in the corner, one the company's ancient IT department didn't even know existed. I downloaded the terabytes of raw data, the final analyses, the molecular models, onto a series of encrypted solid-state drives. Then I initiated a military-grade data wipe on the local server, a 7-pass erasure that would leave nothing behind but scrambled, meaningless code. I moved through the lab, packing my personal equipment, my favorite micropipettes, the custom-built electrophoresis gel box, the small collection of tissue cultures that held the original cell lines for the Ethelgard peptide. I packed the vials of the purified, finalized drug, the physical manifestation of my genius. They were my crown jewels. As I worked, my phone buzzed incessantly on the lab bench. It was Mark. A series of texts, each one a small snapshot of his descending awareness. The first, around 10 p.m., Ren. Call me. The board wants to schedule a preliminary investors meeting for next week. I need your notes on the Ethelgard pitch. An hour later, seriously, where are you? I need to prep. This is big. Then close to midnight, Ren, this isn't funny. Pick up the phone. I'm the CEO now. You work for me. That last one almost made me laugh. You work for me. He had no idea how profoundly, how comically wrong he was. I ignored the messages and continued my work. By 2 a.m., it was done. The lab was stripped bare. The benches were empty, the shelves were cleared, the computer screens were dark and blank. It was a hollowed-out carcass, a testament to a presence that was no longer there. I stood in the doorway and took one last look. It wasn't sad anymore, it was clean. A blank slate. I loaded the boxes into my car and drove away, not looking back. The first phase of the plan was complete. I had become a ghost. The next few weeks unfolded exactly as Evelyn had predicted. My silence was a vacuum, and my brother's panic rushed in to fill it. I watched it all from a distance, like a general observing a battle from a high ridge. My phone became a ticker tape of Mark's escalating desperation. Week 1. Annoyance. His texts were short, clipped, and demanding. Ren, the investors are coming on Friday. I need the presentation deck. Now. Followed by, if you think this little disappearing act is going to get you a better severance package, you're mistaken. He thought this was a negotiation. He thought I was pouting. He still believed he held all the cards. Week 2 confusion. He must have finally gone down to the lab himself. The tone of his messages shifted dramatically. Ren, where is everything? The lab is empty. The computers are wiped. What did you do? This is company property. You can't just take it. The all-caps shouting was a beautiful thing to behold. I could picture him, standing in the middle of the empty room, his handsome face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. He would have called the 1 or 2 lab assistants, who had occasionally helped me with menial tasks, but they knew nothing. I had kept my work siloed, my process opaque. They could only report that Ren was very private and handled all the important data herself. He was facing a locked door and was just beginning to realize he didn't even know what the key looked like. Week 3. Pure, unadulterated panic. The investors' meeting must have been a catastrophe. He had nothing to show them. No data, no samples, no patent documentation he could understand. He had only his charm. And for the first time in his life, it wasn't enough. You can't charm a molecule. You can't sell a feeling to a venture capitalist who wants to see phase 2 trial results. His messages became a stream of consciousness of fear and accusation. You're trying to sabotage me. You're trying to destroy Dad's legacy. This is illegal. I'm calling a lawyer. Mom and Dad would be so ashamed of you. The mention of our parents was a predictable, desperate gambit. It was a button he had pushed his whole life to get what he wanted. But the button was no longer connected to anything. I read the messages with a kind of clinical detachment, saved them all to a secure folder, and went about my day. I was following Evelyn's advice. I took up baking. I started with sourdough, a project that required patience, precision, and a deep understanding of unseen biological processes. It was, in its own way, a form of therapy. While Mark was having a meltdown, I was quietly perfecting my starter. The real break came from an unexpected source, what my friend Lena would call the karmic agent, a reporter for a major biotech industry journal, a sharp woman named Alicia Vance, had caught wind of a miracle Alzheimer's drug emerging from a small family-run firm in Portland. She had done her homework. She had gone to the International Patent Registry and found the filing for Ethelgard, and she had seen the name of the assignee, Helios Biochemical LLC. She called Mark for an interview. Lena got the story from a friend at the Journal and relayed it to me with immense satisfaction. Alicia Vance had started with softball questions, letting Mark puff out his chest and talk about his vision for the company. Then she dropped the bomb. "It's a fascinating breakthrough, Mr. Carver," she had said, her tone innocently inquisitive. "I was looking at the patent, and the assignee is listed as a firm called Helios Biochemical. Can you tell me about your company's relationship with them? Is it a partnership? An acquisition?" Lena said. There was a long, dead silence on the line. Mark, the man who always had an answer, was speechless. He had never heard of Helios Biochemical. He had no idea it was the legal entity his own parents had been paying for 3 years. He fumbled, he stammered, he gave a rambling, incoherent answer about proprietary structures and subsidiary arms that made it painfully clear he was completely out of his depth. The article Alicia Vance published was a masterpiece of professional assassination. It celebrated the promise of Ethelgard, while mercilessly exposing the incompetence of the company's new CEO. She wrote, "While the science behind Ethelgard appears to be revolutionary, the leadership at Sterling Carver seems troublingly unfamiliar with the basic facts of their own flagship product." She quoted his non-answer about Helios Biochemical verbatim. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The article was a shark in the water, and the scent of blood sent the investment community into a frenzy. The few tentative investors Mark had been courting vanished overnight. They didn't just walk away, they ran. No one wants to invest in a company whose CEO doesn't even know who owns his only valuable asset. The company began to hemorrhage talent. These were the career employees, the ones who had stayed through the lean years out of loyalty to my father and a belief in the company's mission. They were chemists, project managers, and regulatory experts. They were not, however, loyal to Mark. They saw a charlatan at the helm, driving their ship directly toward an iceberg. One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Ren, it's David Chen." I was the senior lab manager. On the 3rd floor. I remembered David, a quiet, decent man who had been with the company for 20 years. He was one of the few people who had always treated me with professional respect, even when I was just the boss's daughter hiding in the basement. "David," I said, surprised. "How are you?" "I'm updating my resume," he said, his voice weary. "Along with about half the senior staff, I handed in my resignation this morning. Ren, it's a disaster here. Mark he's in over his head. He's yelling at people, he's making promises he can't keep. He's trying to get the marketing team to launch a campaign for a drug we don't have. After that article came out, it's over. The place is a morgue." There was a pause. Then he said, his voice lowering, "Some of us were talking. We always knew that work was yours. We never saw him in the lab, not once. If you ever land somewhere else, or start something new, a lot of us would follow you in a heartbeat. You're the real deal, Ren. We always knew." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. That single phone call meant more to me than any inheritance ever could have. It was validation. It was respect, freely given by a peer. It was everything my parents had denied me. The rage that had been fueling me for weeks began to transmute into something else, something solid, a quiet, unshakable confidence. I wasn't just a spurned daughter, getting revenge anymore. I was a leader who had a team waiting for her. The final, desperate move from Mark came a few days later. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was in my kitchen, my hands covered in flour, pulling a perfectly golden brown loaf of sourdough from the oven. There was a frantic, insistent pounding on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. It was Mark, and he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, her face a mask of grim disappointment, was my great-aunt Mildred. Aunt Mildred was the family's emotional enforcer, the matriarch of guilt. She was my father's older sister, a woman who wielded family loyalty like a weapon. Bringing her was a calculated, low blow. It was a declaration of emotional warfare. I took a deep breath, wiped the flour from my hands, and opened the door. Mark looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Aunt Mildred, however, looked as immovable as a granite monument. "Ren," Mark began, his voice strained. "We need to talk." "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice even. I made no move to let them in. Aunt Mildred pushed past him, her purse held in front of her, like a shield. "Don't you take that tone with your brother," she snapped, her eyes sweeping over my small apartment with undisguised disdain. "We are coming in. Your family is in crisis, and you are hiding in here baking bread." They were in my space, uninvited, a violation I felt in my bones. Mark followed her in, closing the door behind him. The air in the room instantly became thick and unbreathable. "How could you do this, Ren?" Mark's voice cracked. The charm was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading desperation. "The company is falling apart. The investors are gone. David Chen quit. You're destroying everything Dad built." "Dad built a company that was failing," I said calmly, refusing to let them see me rattled. "It was on the verge of bankruptcy. I was the one who saved it, or I was going to, by stealing its most valuable asset." Aunt Mildred interjected, her voice dripping with accusation. "Your father and mother trusted you. They gave you a place to work. They supported you, and this is how you repay them, with betrayal. What would they think if they could see you now?" This was their strategy. A two-pronged attack of guilt and manufactured outrage. It was a performance I had seen 100 times before. "What would they think?" I repeated, and a cold, hard anger gave my voice an edge of steel. "I imagine they'd think the same thing they always did, Mildred. That my work was merely a raw ingredient for Mark's success. They trusted me to handle the science stuff, and I did. They didn't trust me enough to mention my name in their will, did they? They didn't respect me enough to give me a title, or a salary, or a single shred of the credit." I walked over to my kitchen counter, where a folder lay waiting. It was the one Evelyn had prepared for me. The proposal. I had known this moment would come. "This isn't about Dad's legacy," I said, turning to face them. "This is about my future. A future you, Mark, and my parents decided I wasn't entitled to. You read the will, you heard the words. They hoped you would find a suitable roles for me." I let the words hang in the air, their condescension as potent as a poison. "I was going to," Mark said weakly. "I was going to give you a great job." "A great job in HR?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Managing vacation schedules while you took the credit for my life's work. No thank you." I slid the folder across the counter toward him. "This is what we have to talk about. This is the only thing we have to talk about." Mark opened it, his hands shaking. He read the first page, then the second. I watched the color drain from his face. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. 80% of the profits. Ren, this is insane. This is extortion." "No, Mark," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. It's a correction. It's the market adjusting for the value I created, and the value you didn't. That is my one and only offer. It's more than you deserve. It's certainly more than you were planning to give me. Aunt Mildred snatched the papers from his hand. She scanned them, her lips tightening into a thin, white line. "This is a disgrace," she hissed. "Family does not do this to family." "Really?" I shot back, the last of my patience evaporating. "Does family erase a daughter's 30 years of existence in a legal document? Does family hand over her life's work to a brother who thinks a protein is something you eat for dinner? This family taught me that my only value was what I could provide, so I'm providing, on my terms." I looked at Mark, at his broken, desperate expression, and I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a profound, quiet distance. The emotional hold they'd had over me was gone. I was looking at a stranger who happened to share my DNA. "You have 24 hours to have your lawyer contact mine," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Take the deal or I walk, and I take Athelgard with me, to a company that actually understands what it's worth. Now please get out of my apartment." For a moment, nobody moved. The air was electric. Then Aunt Mildred, sputtering with indignation, grabbed Mark's arm and pulled him toward the door. "This is not over, young lady," she warned. "Oh, I know," I said, as they stepped out into the hallway. "It's just the beginning." I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, my heart finally starting to race. The smell of freshly baked bread filled my kitchen. It was the smell of a new life. The meeting was set for the following afternoon at Evelyn Reed's office, the Lion's Den. Mark arrived with Mr. Sterling, the family lawyer, who looked even more disappointed than usual. He was a man accustomed to drafting simple wills for wealthy, predictable people, not navigating the minefield of international patent law and corporate warfare. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mark, on the other hand, had tried to reclaim his old persona. He wore his best suit, his hair was perfectly styled, and he had a look of pained, righteous bravado on his face. It was a flimsy shield against the tidal wave he knew was coming. I was already there with Evelyn. We sat on one side of the massive glass conference table. The room was stark and intimidating, offering no comfort. The view of the city and the river was sweeping and beautiful, a portrait of a world that was utterly indifferent to the small, pathetic drama about to unfold. Mark and Sterling sat opposite us. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, shuffling some papers that I knew were completely useless. "Miss Carver, Wren," he began, his voice hesitant. "My client Mark Carver, the CEO of Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals, is here to discuss your proposal. We feel the terms are punitive and frankly unconscionable. Furthermore, we contend that the intellectual property in question, the patent for Athelgard, is the rightful property of the company." He was reading from a script. It was a weak, predictable opening gambit. Evelyn leaned forward, a predator sensing weakness. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were like surgical instruments, precise and sharp. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her tone deceptively mild, "let's dispense with the theater. On what grounds do you base that contention? Did Wren have an employment contract with Sterling Carver that included an IP assignment clause?" Sterling blinked. "Well, no, not a formal one, but there was an understanding. An understanding is not a legally binding document." Evelyn cut in smoothly. "Was she a salaried employee of the company during the 3 years she developed this drug?" "She received a regular stipend for expenses," Sterling countered weakly. "Indeed she did," Evelyn said, sliding a thin file across the table. a stipend paid by Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals to an outside consulting firm, a limited liability company by the name of Helios Biochemical. I have copies of every single invoice submitted by my client and every single canceled check signed by your late client, Albert Carver. Your company has a 3-year paper trail proving a contractor-client relationship. Under the law, the work product created by the contractor belongs to the contractor, unless explicitly signed away in a work-for-hire agreement. No such agreement exists. Mr. Sterling's face went pale. He opened the file and stared at the invoices, at his old client's familiar signature. He was seeing the bars of the cage for the first time. Mark, who clearly hadn't been briefed on this detail, looked back and forth between the lawyers, his bravado beginning to crack. "This is ridiculous," Mark burst out, unable to stay silent any longer. "She's my sister. She worked in our building, using our lab, a lab you had abandoned," Evelyn replied without missing a beat, "which my client brought back to working condition, using funds invoiced to you for that specific purpose. Mr. Carver, your case has no merit. You are attempting to lay claim to an asset you have no legal right to. My client, the sole owner of Helios Biochemical, holds the international patent. She holds the proprietary data. She holds the physical prototypes. You," she paused, letting the word hang in the air, "hold nothing. Your company, without Athelgard, has a valuation of approximately its salvageable office furniture. Your investors know this, your senior staff knew this, which is why they have resigned. You are the captain of a sinking ship, and my client is standing on the shore, offering you a raft." She leaned back in her chair. "Her offer of an 80-20 split is, as your colleague so astutely pointed out, unconscionable. It is unconscionably generous. It is the only thing keeping Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals from being a memory by the end of the fiscal quarter. So the question before you is not whether the deal is fair. The question is whether you will accept it, or whether you will preside over the complete and total dissolution of your father's company. Checkmate." The room fell into a dead silence, broken only by the sound of Mark's ragged breathing. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The charming salesman was gone. The entitled golden boy was gone. All that was left was a scared, defeated man, stripped bare of all his delusions. "Ren, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. The sound was pathetic. "Don't do this. We're family." I looked at him. I searched his face for any sign of genuine remorse, any flicker of understanding of the years of hurt he had so casually inflicted. I found none. All I saw was fear. Fear of losing his status, his money, his unearned kingdom. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry I had turned out to be smarter than he was. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The original plan had been to take the 80%, to become the silent, controlling power behind the throne, to force him to work for me. But as I looked at his pleading face, I realized it wasn't enough. Tying myself to him, to the ghost of that company, would still be a kind of prison. It wasn't a true victory. A true victory was freedom. I gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head to Evelyn. She understood immediately. "My brother is right about one thing," I said, my voice clear and steady. "We are family, and I've learned a valuable lesson about what that means. It means you read the will, Mark. You stood there and listened to them erase me, and you planned to give me a job in HR. You didn't fight for me. You didn't defend me. You put your hand on my shoulder and prepared to take everything." I stood up. "So I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to give you a clean slate." Mark looked at me, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. He thought I was caving. I turned to Evelyn. The offer is withdrawn. The hope in Mark's eyes died, replaced by utter confusion. Mr. Sterling looked like he was about to have a heart attack. What? Mark stammered. What do you mean? I mean the deal is off the table, I said, looking directly at him. 80% isn't enough. I've decided I want 100%. Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals gets nothing. I will not be licensing Athelgard to you. Not now. Not ever. I'll be taking my drug, my data, and my team to a competitor. One of the big ones. A real pharmaceutical company that knows how to value its assets. I walked toward the door. They hoped you would find a suitable roles for me, I said, pausing with my hand on the handle. And I have. CEO of my own destiny. You, on the other hand, are the CEO of a company with no products, no prospects, and no future. That is your legacy. You can have it. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving my brother and his lawyers sitting in the ruins of the world they thought they owned. I didn't look back. The sound of the heavy glass door clicking shut behind me was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The 6 months that followed were a blur of intense, exhilarating work. The news of Athelgard, and the fact that it was now a free agent, sent shockwaves through the biotech world. The story of the quiet scientist who had outmaneuvered her own family became a quiet legend in the industry. As Evelyn had predicted, the big players came calling. I took meetings in New York, in Boston, in San Francisco. I wasn't the supplicant anymore. I was the one with the power, and they knew it. I ultimately didn't sell out to a giant. Instead, I negotiated a strategic partnership with a mid-sized, innovative firm that respected the science, more importantly, respected me. They provided the capital, the manufacturing infrastructure, and the global distribution network. I provided the genius. Helios Biochemical remained an independent entity, the core of a new research and development division that I would run with complete autonomy. My first act as president and chief scientific officer of the new Helios division was to make a few phone calls. My first call was to David Chen. David, I said, I have a position open, senior lab manager. The pay is 20% above your last salary, and the benefits are better. More importantly, the work will be valued. Are you interested? He laughed, a sound of pure relief. Ren, I've had my resume on your desk since the day I quit. Just tell me when to start. One by one, I reassembled my team, the best and brightest from Sterling Carver, the ones who had been stifled by my parents' archaic management and horrified by Mark's empty bluster, all came on board. We had a state-of-the-art lab, a real budget, and a shared sense of mission. We were building something new, something better, on the ashes of the old. Meanwhile, the inevitable happened to Sterling Carver Pharmaceuticals. Without Athelgard, it was an empty shell. Mark, in a last-ditch effort, tried to sell the company, but there were no buyers. Who would buy a name and a building full of bad memories? Within months, the company declared bankruptcy. The assets were liquidated for pennies on the dollar to pay off the creditors. The beautiful family home, the one my mother had decorated with such pride, went up for auction. Mark, I heard through the grapevine, was living in a small rented condo and trying to find a job. The charm, it seemed, had finally run out. I felt a strange lack of emotion at the news. It wasn't joy, it was just closure, a logical conclusion to a story of arrogance and neglect. They had built their house on a foundation of lies, and it had crumbled, just as it was always meant to. One of my first major financial decisions was a personal one. I endowed a new research grant at my old university, specifically for high-risk, high-reward projects in neurodegenerative disease. It was called the Carol and Albert Carver Grant for Innovative Science. I thought the irony was fitting. Their names would be attached to the kind of bold, visionary work they never had the courage to support in their own daughter. The first recipient was, of course, Dr. Lena Petrova. Her work on telomere shortening, the research her old boss had dismissed as a niche inquiry, was now fully funded. We celebrated at a small, elegant restaurant, the kind of place I never would have been able to afford a year ago. We raised our glasses of champagne to Helios Biochemical, Lena said, her eyes shining, and to burning it all down to build something better. I'll drink to that, I said. And to you, Lena. Thank you for everything. You did the work, Ren, she said. I just reminded you what it was worth. And she was right. That's the real lesson here, isn't it? As I sit here now, telling you this story, that's the one thing that rings true. They mistook my silence for weakness, but it was just me, working. They thought my value was something they could bestow or withhold in a legal document. They thought my worth was a suitable roles they could deign to give me, but they were wrong. Your value isn't what people give you permission to have, it's what you create. It's the work you do when no one is watching. It's the quiet, relentless dedication to your own talent. For a long time, I thought this story was about revenge, and maybe in the beginning it was. There was a certain cold satisfaction in watching their world unravel, but it wasn't about revenge in the end. It was about correction. It was about taking a story that someone else had written for me. A story where I was a minor character, a footnote, and ripping out the pages. It was about writing my own ending, an ending where my name wasn't just in the will, it was on the building. They tried to put me in my place, but they forgot that I was the one who knew how to build a new place from the ground up, and my new place has a much, much better view. Have you ever been the one doing all the work while someone else took all the credit? Have you ever had your contribution dismissed or overlooked by the people who should have been cheering you on the loudest? Let me know your story in the comments below. Sometimes, just knowing you're not the only one is the first step to reclaiming your own power. And if this story resonated with you, I hope you'll like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are a lot of stories out there that need to be told.